Okay, welcome back, students. This is Mr. Mace again, and we are going to go through Unit 4, Lesson 2. And for this lesson, we have two major learning targets, or two main ideas that we are going to cover. The first one is to identify and name some three-dimensional shapes called prisms. And we're going to focus on that here in the first page. You're identifying the shapes that we see here on this screen. And the second part of this then will be to open up these three-dimensional shapes, or to look at a two-dimensional version of this shape after it has been peeled apart or opened up and laid flat. All right, and we call that shape a net. And again, all this should be review. If you were in 5th grade math last year, you have the idea or understand the idea that a net is simply something that is an unfolded three-dimensional shape. And we can do that with both prisms and pyramids. For today, we're focusing on prisms. And what I like to tell my students in the classroom, and as we start to manipulate some actual three-dimensional shapes, or we start trying to be a little bit more hands-on and tangible when we're live and in person, we talk about how do we name these shapes. And it sometimes seems like it might be really, really confusing, but in all honesty, guys, it really boils down to one or two things. The first thing is to identify what side is the base, or what sides, plural, if we're talking about prism, are the bases. All right? And the thing I want you to establish here or understand here is that there will be rectangles or squares in every three-dimensional shape. We're never going to not have rectangles and squares, okay? No matter, unless you're talking about obviously a sphere or a cone of some kind, that's a different story. But if we're talking about prisms, for the most part, we are looking at shapes that will have rectangles or squares along the sides. All right, so the key here is to identify, do we see any other two-dimensional shapes? Do we see any other shapes other than rectangles and squares that are in these three-dimensional shapes? And as you look at the ones that are displayed here prominently, 1, 2, 3, and 4, you should see that 3 of the 4 have other shapes. So the first thing is to identify the base. So number 1, the base is anything that is not a rectangle or a square. Well, if I look at this one, I should be able to identify that this base right here, okay, this line, it's blue on blue, probably not the best decision for me right now, but that'll make more sense when I move to the next questions, is a triangle, right? So we are looking at a triangle here. So the base in this case is a triangle. Now, the key to determining whether this is a triangle prism, triangular prism, or a triangular pyramid is how many bases do we have. Okay, and so we need to figure out or identify, is there one base? Are we going from a shape to a point, to a vertex, or are we going shape to shape? So in this case, the opposite side here is also a triangle. So we are going shape to shape. And those are our bases. Even though for our purposes right now, guys, we think of a base, I know that this is automatically default in our mind, even for myself. If I think of something as the base, I think of it as the bottom, right? It's the thing that it's sitting on. But realize that we can manipulate, and that's where being in class and having these three-dimensional shapes that we can manipulate with our hands, we can see how we can turn and twist and set these things in different ways. All right, so what we're looking at here just happens to be a triangular prism that has been laid down on its side, but the triangles are the bases. All right, and so again, this brings me to the second part of this idea. And I also tell my students while we're in class about this, is if you know anything about popular music, or I guess it's been a couple years now, but Meghan Trainor, I'm sure most of you have heard of Meghan Trainor before. She sings a song called It's All About the Bass. And to me, that is the number one thing to help me memorize how to name these prisms, or any three-dimensional shape for that matter. Once we can identify the base, we name it from its base. So in this case, since we have a triangle for the base, it becomes a triangular. This is a prism, not a pyramid, because we have two bases instead of one. So all about the base. All right. Now, number 2, again, we're looking to identify any shapes that we see here that are not rectangles or squares. Well, If I look at this shape right here, this two-dimensional shape, and again, it's not the one that it's sitting on, right? But it is the one that is not a rectangle or a square. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is an 8-sided figure. Hopefully you remember from previous math lessons or from previous years that an 8-sided figure is called an octagon. Again, also about naming things is the number of sides determines the names of our shapes. So octagon is the name of that base, okay? And the other side is also another octagon. It doesn't go to a point, and it's never going to go from an octagon to a hexagon, or it's never going to go from an octagon to a pentagon. Again, the bases will be the same. So our bases in this case are an octagon, so then the name becomes an octagonal prism. Again, hint here, we're only dealing with prisms since that's what we are seeing in the labels here, so fairly straightforward. All right. Number 3, again, looking at the face that is showing to us. And again, it is the base. Even though we're not sitting on it, anything other than a square or a rectangle is going to be considered the base. So this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6-sided hexagon. My smartboard is a little off kilter here, but this is a hexagon and then a hexagonal. Helps if I spell things right. Hexagonal prism. All right, very straightforward. Now, if you look at both 4 and 5, we actually don't have anything other than squares and rectangles. Okay, but we do have some opposite sides that are equal and some that are different, but those in both cases are rectangular prisms. The one, number 5, could be a little bit more specific and call it a square prism. Okay, and it's not called a cube because for it to be a cube, all the sides would need to be squares, not just the ends or the bases. So number 4 is truly a rectangular prism, and number 5 is what we call a square prism instead of a rectangular prism, but it would qualify in that same category. And then the last one over here, you can see that the base is a pentagon, and so that becomes a pentagonal prism. Now, the second part of this lesson, the more probably challenging part, I guess you could say, but not extremely challenging. I'm going to skip past this screen, okay, is this page right here. And this is going to be where we match up our net, remember our two-dimensional, opened up, unwrapped three-dimensional shape, laid flat, with its three-dimensional prism. I don't think this is an extremely hard one because, again, we don't have anything that is not a net or a prism. They are going to all match up, so we don't have any kind of hidden ones in there that aren't going to create an actual net. So all we're really looking for is to identify which bases are the same. So if I look at number 9, the key, again, is to see anything that's not a rectangle. And the book does a great job for us of shading it in blue so it's easy to find. But we got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is our 6-sided or hexagonal net, hexagonal prism that we're looking for. So now I simply need to go to the right-hand side and look at the A, B, C, D, E, F, and determine, or E I guess it stops at, and determine which of these is our hexagonal prism. So I'm looking for a hexagon. Okay, there's only going to be one of them over here. So A is a 5-sided figure, that's a pentagon. B looks to be an octagon. Okay, I'm not going to take the time to actually count them out right now, but I see that there are 8 sides there. But letter C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And again, even if I don't want to count them, but I just simply look and see that the shapes are similar, I should see that I am looking here at letter C being the answer for number 9. All right, there's only ever going to be anything, one shape other than rectangles and squares in this net or in this prism. So once we identify those, it's pretty easy to match them up. All right, number 2 or 10, number 2 on this page, now we're looking for that blue base of a triangle. Okay, again, we can identify how many pieces it has. We can go through all the stuff, but really the only thing we need to do and identify is finding the base that has a triangle on the other side. All right, so if I look here, A again, we've already said, B doesn't, so I look at D, and yes, there is a triangular base, so D becomes our answer for number 10. That is a triangular prism. So again, once you understand what a prism is, once you understand that we're really only looking to identify the base, it becomes a pretty easy task, a pretty easy process here. Now, the next one is that rectangular prism that we talked about, or a square prism. Now again, I'm not a real big fan of the way that the book lays this one out, because in all honesty, we talked about this, right? The only things that are different from the others should be the base. So if I look at E, to me, that was a great example of the square prism, but they are telling us right now that this blue rectangle is the base, and so its opposite is here. Nothing wrong with that. It's still going to be the same shape. We're still going to only have one over here to identify, but that should be letter E as the only thing with rectangles and squares. So 11 should be E. Number 12, we're looking at pentagons, and if you remember earlier, all the way up at the top here, letter A was made of two bases that were pentagons. So 12 should be A, and then that leaves us, if we didn't know already, the octagonal prism, which is the only number or letter left, which is letter B. Okay, so again, I don't think anything too challenging, very much a lesson that is review from what we have covered in past years. But if you do have issues, or you're not sure how we got the names of these shapes, or you're not sure why we're naming things what we are, or how we're matching up these nets with their prisms, please make sure you contact your teacher. Please reach out. Again, there will be a short exit ticket to help, or assignment to help prove your knowledge of what you learned here in this video. Please make sure you do that. And good luck with the rest of your 3D dimensional shapes during this unit.